Good morning from San Diego and welcome to LaunchBio's Larger Than Life Science. My name is Becky Beatty and I'm happy to be representing our organization today. If you're familiar with LaunchBio, welcome back. And if you're new to LaunchBio, we are a nonprofit created to support the growth and success of early stage life science entrepreneurs. So what does that mean? Pre-COVID, we hosted monthly events focusing our content on information that entrepreneurs need in order to navigate the tricky startup environment. During these events, you were able to connect with peers, executives, advisors, and experts. And as we all know, making connections and building a network is essential not only for entrepreneurs, but for all professionals. With our webinar series, we've been able to continue to bring you valuable content, but making those connections is a little bit harder. We have two suggestions for you today. The first is simply to reach out. All of our expert panelists are here not only to educate, but to advise. Ask questions today via the Q&A function, connect on LinkedIn, or ask me for contact information. During this time of social separation, we are committed to keeping you connected, so let's make it happen. Our second suggestion is to join our Founder Circle forums. We launched this concept in Southern California and are now expanding it to Boston, New York, Philly, Durham, and Dallas area. Founder Circle is a peer advisory forum for life science founders and C-level executives. These meetings are facilitated by industry experts and the topics center on business challenges that all early stage companies face. Participation is limited, so encourage our founders to apply and again, connect. And I'll post a link to the application in the chat later today. Before we begin, we want to thank our co-host, UCSD Office of Innovation and Commercialization. They are wonderful friends and community partners, so thank you for co-hosting with us. We also want to thank our sponsors. We carefully look for and choose partners who will support our mission to identify and counsel high growth, high impact life science companies. At various stages of your development, these partners will help you grow. We work very closely with our sponsors, and I can say definitively that they are also excellent people, and we're proud to introduce you to them. I invite you to take a look at our resource page at launchbio.org, and again, we're happy to make personal introductions. Today's discussion is truly far out. We all know that over the last 20 years, humans have had a presence in low Earth orbit, or LEO, where we have used the International Space Station to study the effects of microgravity on biological processes. What you might not know is in the next 8 to 10 years, the International Space Station is scheduled to be decommissioned, and Axiom Space and its partners are building the next generation life science research and manufacturing facility. In the near future, we will have access, capabilities, and the infrastructure to develop, test, and manufacture new drugs and therapies in space. This is not science fiction, this is reality, and this is our larger than life science discussion today. To provide groundwork for our talk, I'd like to introduce Anjali Gupta, the life science lead at Axiom Space.
Today, I'd like to take a few minutes to provide you with some background and set the stage for today's discussion. Becky, would you please start the slides? The International Space Station has provided 20 years of continuous human presence. It's a true international collaboration with more than 100 companies, thousands of research investigations, and novel insights. The ISS has been a true inspiration for both young and old alike. However, as Becky said, the ISS is reaching its end of life, so what's next? The 2020s are ushering in a new era for the final frontier. We're going to take a look at how space is evolving and the opportunities that space has to offer, both to entrepreneurs and innovators, as well as anyone who might be interested in space. First, let me introduce you to Axiom Space. At Axiom, our vision is a thriving home in space that benefits every human everywhere. Our mission is to improve life on Earth and foster possibilities beyond it by building and operating the world's first commercial space station. Axiom is the only provider of private human spaceflight missions to the ISS. Our goal is to support diverse global market segments, which include deep space exploration, commercial on-orbit research, commercial on-orbit manufacturing, and brand and media partnerships in addition to human spaceflight. I'd like to take this moment to share a brief video and provide you with a perspective. As you can see here, Axiom module is going to arrive first, and it will attach to the node 2 of the forward port of the ISS. So here you can see the Canadarm, which is repositioning the Earth Observatory to the nadir of that module. Next, you see the Habitat module arriving, and it's being grabbed by the Canadarm. The research and manufacturing facility, you can see here, is arriving next. I want to point out that each of these modules is basically an independent spacecraft. Each module has its own propulsion and navigation system. And this is how the Axiom station is going to be assembled in low Earth orbit, initially attached to the ISS. The modules will be launched on a launch carrier and then deployed into low Earth orbit, eventually finding their way to the ISS. Here you can see the power and thermal tower module flying in last. It will take up 100 kilowatts of power. And this module is going to fly in a folded configuration. And then once attached, the solar arrays will deploy, as you can see here, revealing the airlock that will support EVA work. The modules you see here will take flight in 2024. The station build out will complete by 2028. In the meantime, Axiom will conduct private astronaut missions to the ISS. The first private astronaut mission is go for launch in January 2022, which is coming up quite quickly. Eventually, we will see Axiom station separating from the ISS to become a free flyer. Next, I'd like you to meet Spaceinduced. Spaceinduced is an industry leader in automated systems in the pursuit of health and technology manufacturing in space. Since 2017, through a NASA Space Act agreement, Spaceinduced provides facilities to support iterative R&D and manufacturing on the ISS. Through an integrated and intuitive approach, Spaceinduced works alongside its diverse partner base to embrace pathways for on-orbit production, yielding valuable and transformational solutions for humanity. Besides its coolness factor, why space? Low Earth orbit offers a unique environment within reach. Some of these key characteristics of space are highlighted here. Space is an extreme environment defined by extreme temperatures, ultra-high vacuum, high energy ionizing radiation, and atomic oxygen. When a spacecraft travels Earth at 17,500 miles per hour and 250 miles above Earth, it is in free fall. The constant free fall creates the weightless environment known as microgravity. As a result of weightlessness, density gradients are eliminated. There are no gravity-driven convection currents. There is no sedimentation, and surface tension dominates. Levitation enables processing of materials without a container. And finally, space offers a unique vantage point at 250 miles above Earth. With 90-minute orbits, this is an opportunity to observe the planet remotely. So in the past 20 years, the unique space environment has already unveiled novel insights into applications, biological mechanisms, and disease models. These insights can be leveraged for pharmaceutical drug discovery and on-orbit manufacturing, as Dr. Jameson is doing through her NASA award. So I'd just like you to ponder, space is a place to investigate, discover, innovate, create, and transform.
Thank you, Anjali. If this all sounds exciting, you could go ahead and raise your hand in the audience, because as I watch the video, it's like, wow. And this is our discussion today. And in our pre-event calls, a lot of it was centered around this is happening. And there's a whole economy that's being formed around this. So I'm really pleased to introduce our impressive panel today to discuss the Orbital Lab. Greg Horowitz will be our moderator. Thank you, Greg. Greg is a co-founder, or the co-founder and managing director of T2 Venture Creations. He spent over 25 years working in the startup and venture capital community. He's also the co-author of a best-selling book called The Rainforest. Jana Stadomir, help me, is the commercial innovation officer at Spaceinduced, and Jana leads the development of commercial market creation in low Earth orbit for biomedical and technology research and manufacturing applications. And finally, Dr. Jameson is a professor of medicine at UC San Diego. She's a pioneer in cancer stem cell research and has been awarded a 3-year, nearly $5 million award from NASA to study the effects of microgravity on stem cell self-renewal. So with that said, Greg, I'll let you take it away.
What I want to say is that as you have questions, please feel free to push them into the chat function or raise your hand, and we'll get to them as we can. We'll be monitoring those. Super excited with this group. I feel kind of like I'm going to be learning a tremendous amount too, since I'm just kind of new to this whole field. So thank you all for being here. The first question I have, which will be kind of a layman's kind of view at this, is, what are you really hoping to find? As you kind of go on this journey, what are some of the kind of things that, as you look forward, you think we might be able to get some insights into? I don't know who the first person, maybe Katrina, maybe you start off. And then,
I'm happy to launch this conversation. We have to use as many funds as possible. Exactly. It's really a pleasure to be here today. With Space Tango and UC San Diego, we have this NASA NRA to start the first integrated space stem cell orbital research lab to really understand the basic underpinnings of regeneration in different tissues. And can we understand how regeneration, or self-renewal as it's called, goes awry and gives rise not only to pre-cancer stem cells, but ultimately to cancer stem cells. So when Jana and I were writing this grant together with our colleagues here and at Space Tango, we really started to think about, can we intercede with cancer development? And can we understand this in the brain, the liver, and the blood? So we have this opportunity to understand if the increased exposure to radiation, not just ionizing radiation, but actually proton and neutron based radiation, also increased inflammatory exposures in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station, does that provide a compressed time frame for us to understand aging, as well as to understand the pre-cancer stem cell initiating events in basically a shorter period of time? So we're trying to take advantage of that unique environment that Anjali was alluding to in low Earth orbit to really say, can we understand the inception of cancer in a much shorter period of time than it would take us to do on Earth? And is this a new opportunity in low Earth orbit to use microgravity actually to understand stem cell division? Is it symmetrical? Is it asymmetrical? Is this going to be a good place to clone stem cells, to make them make more of themselves, to self-renew again? Or is that process going to be disrupted by the environment? And can we make newer molecules for therapeutics, small molecule inhibitors, because we have the capacity to do flow chemistry better? Or with Anjali, can we nucleate a crystal for a protein that's very difficult to crystallize here on Earth because of gravitational constraints? So there are many opportunities. We're just excited to get started on it. And especially as a team, when you have this kind of brave community where people are willing to do this. And we saw this on Nova last night, talking about what it took them to launch the new Mars rover. This is a new generation of equipment, but it's a new generation of people that are working together with really disparate backgrounds. So I think it's at the interface of new fields that you really get major advances. So I'm thrilled to be part of this team.
Very cool. Jenna or Anjali?
Yeah. Sure. Well, I was just going to say, I was reflecting on, 2020, and I realized that 2020 is the 30th anniversary of since the inception of the human genome, and it's 25 years since the internet was essentially born. Netscape and your first browser. So just to put this in context, in 1990, when the Human Genome Project was launched, I was a freshman at UC Berkeley, working in a genetics lab. That was 30 years ago. So you asked, what do we hope to get out of this? Our presence in space is inspirational, but it's also aspirational in the sense that we want to launch new verticals. We want to launch and discover new processes, new science, new ways of doing things. And space is helping us push those boundaries forward. So if you think about, 30 years from now, what will 2051 look like? Back then, as a freshman in college, I couldn't really imagine what 30 years later would look like. But now that same, we stand at the same intersection, what will that look like in 30 years? So what do you imagine discovering, improving processes that you may want to discover or refine in Earth, in low Earth orbit? That's really the question that we're trying to find out the answer to.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, and I think you framed it perfectly, both Kat and Anjali, in terms of every time there's a new tool that becomes available to us, you kind of see that change when we think about just even the techniques like PCR or CRISPR, or right. Microgravity is a new tool that really advances innovation and our understanding of science. And when we think about the iScore, we like to call it Integrated Space Stem Cell Orbital Research Laboratory that we're developing, it's a similar concept of taking that innovation that you see here on the ground that ends up sort of creating many biotech companies here in San Diego and doing that 250 miles up in microgravity. So I think you're really going to see, as you think forward to the future, that the advances and the tools that we have today are really going to accelerate the pace of what we understand and learn in a way that's really going to change the way that we think about things.
So what kind of time horizon are we talking about? First, to where we begin getting these insights, and then where they may have a commercial or some kind of social impact.
Yeah, things are happening today on the International Space Station, and as a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting because with the commercial crew flights that have just taken place, there's a renewed interest in space, right? I mean, when the shuttle program ended, most people thought so did space. And the truth is we've been continuing to work up there, sort of, I don't want to say behind the curtain a little bit, but it's like the best kept secret, because now everybody really sees the activity that has been going on. And Space Tango is working right now to produce or put parameters together to produce artificial retina, things that will be products in a few years from now that we're already working on the International Space Station. So the ability to think about what the future holds, it's today, it's not 25 years from now, it's very close.
Yeah, and I think in terms of compressing the timeframes for development, if we're talking about small molecule therapeutics or biologics, which are monoclonal antibodies, or even cellular therapeutics, our timeframes have compressed substantially because of these really close industry academia collaborations. It used to be that, UCSD, we would just work on our own, thinking we were very clever, not really understanding the commercialization process. And then we started to realize, wait a minute, we have to work really closely with industry because it's just a different thing to try and develop processes that will allow things to work and translate to the clinic. So we're seeing a real compression. We used to say it would take 10 to 15 years to bring a drug to market. What's happened is now it's 4 or 5, it's just being cut by half at least, but maybe a third. And that has been accelerated even further, weirdly, by COVID. Who could have imagined that a global pandemic would get all scientists, whether in industry or in academia, to work together for one common goal? This is what NASA has done for a long time. They've brought in international partners, they've brought in industry, they've brought in academia. I think now is just an opportunity to work together with Anjali's new orbital research station to see from a basic science, translational and clinical standpoint, what is it that we can learn about human health and how can we intercept cancer before it's really developed? That's one opportunity. How can we slow down aging? I'd certainly like to do that. And then I won't need to drink quite as much coffee in a day. I think there are so many opportunities now. And again, the timeframes have compressed, not just because we're really keen to work together, but also because the funding agencies, we have the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, are interested in a novel landscape, a new way to find solutions to major roadblocks. If you look at stem cell gene therapy, the major roadblock is actually the number of stem cells. Can we expand stem cells in microgravity? Can we understand how to expand stem cell populations and make a small molecule or biologic that would do that on Earth? So there's so many opportunities. And then finally, the FDA has really been on fire. Look at the emergency use applications that have been approved. Moderna, Pfizer, more recently Janssen looks like it's going to get emergency use authorization. The FDA is on fire. So that gives us an opportunity, but also provides the fuel that we need to be able to say, okay, we can do this. We're going to get a SWAT team together and really do this nimbly, and maybe not crowing about it from the rooftops. You know, we want to under promise and over deliver. But I think that's what this team can do. We have absolutely disparate yet complementary skills. So lots to do.
And then from a space station perspective, as you know, Axiom Space is going to be in orbit in about 3 years, 2024. So we will have state-of-the-art technologies on orbit. There's also increased flight cadence. So we're lowering that barrier to access and making space easy. It's not hard anymore. We're simplifying and we're demystifying access to space. That's really the key message that, you know, any entrepreneur or intrapreneur out there who's listening, space is an opportunity, and it's not hard to get into.
Yeah. Well, and as access to space increases and those capabilities are really developing, right? Advanced tools to help us to really do the best science that we can in that microgravity environment. I think you're also sort of seeing the opportunities for the sort of next giant leaps that we can take, right? Small steps now, but space is accessible. We have a permanent presence that we're establishing in low Earth orbit beyond the ISS through groups like Axiom that are working to put commercial space stations, you know, on orbit for us to continue that work that we're doing right now. So from an entrepreneurial standpoint, even when you think about those public-private partnerships, there's a future to where we're going even beyond ISS that we're defining today.
Love that. One of our audience members, Marcelo, asked the question, I'd like to know which were the major clinical results of the previous 1 year at space mission at the ISS. And the astronauts were Kelly from the USA and Kornienko from Russia. And then the second part was it useful to create the guidelines for this new initiative?
You can probably speak to the twin study results a little bit, because we've sort of talked a lot about.
Yeah, I think that it's just under a year. And the great thing between Scott and Mark Kelly is Scott came back 2 inches taller. So you think, well, isn't that fantastic? You know, he gets to gain height. Unfortunately, he had features, at least as published in the twin study in Science, that suggested in his blood he had precancerous changes. He had activated telomerase, the enzyme that's supposed to actually put the caps on the ends of our chromosomes. But if you do that too much, that can lead to precancer. He had what are called inversions, translocations, also activation of a lot of inflammatory cytokines or growth factors that can also precipitate precancer development. So it was actually part of the reason that Jana and I and Anjali wanted to work together, because I think that we owe a debt of gratitude to Scott and Mark Kelly for their really brave insights into science and space, but also the potential effects for people that are going to be going up and down. We've got commercial crew that are going to fly with Anjali and Jana. We need to know what the safety issues are for them and predict and prevent any issues that may lead to precancer, may lead to tissue degeneration, cognitive dysfunction, not being able to think clearly, in other words, viral reactivation syndromes. If there's immune dysfunction, as was suggested in the twin study, will that reactivate certain viruses that our immune system normally suppresses, like John Cunningham JC virus, that will affect the judgment and the coordination of people that are on these longer term space missions. So we have a lot of things still to learn. They provided the opportunity to even think about it. And that takes a huge amount of chutzpah or bravado, but it's actually what it takes to be a real scientist. I think they're showing that we really need to seek the truth. And what often happens when you seek the truth in that kind of brave way is first you're ridiculed, then you're vehemently opposed, and then it's accepted as self-evident. And, I think right now the space thing seems crazy to people. Why would you ever do that? There are really unique things we can learn in space, not just about human health, but about product development. For those of us who've been involved in startup companies, we're somehow often hampered by common roadblocks in drug development. We need to do flow chemistry more effectively. We need to lay down certain biomaterials really cleanly, so there is no kind of turbulence, a blood flow issue going across that graft, as Jana was mentioning for the eye. These are nascent opportunities, but they may become huge. And, we just need to keep an open mind about these things.
Well, as a follow-on to that, Ravi was asking, are there any space-induced diseases other than the muscle wasting, which you referred to before, that is now being studied?
Yeah, I think the main thing that we all know about for many years in space with the space shuttle, as Anjali was alluding to, is bone degeneration, bone demineralization, actually, because they don't have enough gravitational pull on the lining of the bone, which is called the periosteum. I'm a hematologist. I've trained as a bone marrow transplanter. And, I know that that's important for how we maintain our blood, not just our bones. The bones and the blood are inextricably intertwined because our bone marrow is made inside the bone marrow cavity. So I think that we need to look at bone. We need to look at our balance. It looks like people who go up too often have vestibular or balance problems. Executive function may be affected. The brain may not have proper blood flow or also clearance of the CSF. So I think those are pretty obvious things. What we're looking into, though, with the collaboration we have with Space Tango is there fatty liver that starts because of that extraordinarily inflammatory cytokine-inducing environment in space. That's David Brenner and Tatiana Kiseleva working with Space Tango. Is there permanent cognitive dysfunction or some change in ability to make executive decisions on orbit? That's Alison Moultrie, Eric Vierig. And then we're looking at, Sheldon Morris and myself are looking at immune dysfunction and the capacity to actually develop mutations in the blood that would lead to a pre-leukemia stage and ultimately leukemia. So we think there are diseases that could develop in space, but there are already ways to predict and prevent that. We have genomics and other tools to predict it. And we have really novel small molecules and antisense oligonucleotides and other agents that can prevent it. So it's really predict and prevent. That's what we're trying to do with this strategy. And I think that'll help us on Earth as well.
For all of you, Ted was asking, what do you think is the largest near-term opportunity, particularly in terms of additive value in microgravity, radiation, exposure, whatever? And ideally, Ted was asking, can you give us a specific example?
Sure. So, in terms of the commercial markets and creation of commercial markets in low Earth orbit, looking at opportunities, and it's always interesting because a lot of the work that's been done in space to date has really looked at what can we learn and bring back for benefit for life on Earth. When you think about the commercial opportunities from even a manufacturing perspective, you're really looking for kind of the opposite. It sort of flips that research model on its head. It's what can you do in that environment that you can't do here on Earth? So how do you find the opportunities for things like crystallization, where, and I saw a question come up in the chat room about, is it NASA and academia mostly that's kind of driving the work that's going on? And the truth is, there's a lot of pharma companies that are very interested in the work that goes on in microgravity. Merck and Keytruda, very familiar to all of us, sort of had an interesting finding in microgravity about changes in the way that they can actually see that protein crystallize, which could lead to a different route of administration, right? And so as we start to think about what are those opportunities, it's finding those really unique properties of microgravity that allow you to do things on orbit that you couldn't do here on Earth, that would basically really change the game in terms of how you might look at developing a drug, delivering a drug, discovering a drug. So there's so many opportunities and so many commercial companies that I think now recognize that this is a new platform for innovation that can really accelerate their discovery and understanding. And when you find those changes that can't really be recreated here, back on the ground, that's how the new market is going to develop.
And I just want to add that there could be an opportunity for manufacturing in the sense that when you remove gravity from the equation, you're eliminating sedimentation. And so for example, retinal implants, the company is using microgravity as a platform for manufacturing because you're removing that gravity element, you're removing sedimentation. So now you can print these thin films more perfectly and thereby eliminating defects. this can be applied to any number of other manufacturing products, manufacturing of products. So consider, what happens when you actually remove that gravity element. How are the biophysics or the physics changed, and how does that then confer an advantage to your product development or your manufacturing processes?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a perfect example. Layer deposition, ultra thin layers that can be uniformly produced because there's no gravity factors, that are no convection, right? No sedimentation, all the things that Anjali just talked about. And so that really relies on the physical properties. On the biological side, when you think about stem cells, and as Kat mentioned earlier, we look at the way cells differentiate, signal, sort of grow in a microgravity environment that's very different from what we see here on the ground. And a major manufacturing hurdle for us is the number of cells, right? So we see these new drugs coming forward really quickly. What really slows down the regulatory process now is not so much the discovery and the understanding of the therapy, but it's actually manufacturing it. And so have a way to address some of the major challenges that we face here on the ground by using what appears to be a very different environment that most people probably wouldn't think about. That's how we're going to make these giant leaps forward in progress towards where we need to answer tough questions that we can't really answer today.
Yeah, it's like when you look at the bioreactor technology that took off so we could produce hybridomas on a grand scale to make monoclonal antibodies, Greg. Now, in the absence of gravity, that may work a lot better because we're often constrained just by gravity because of the sedimentation effect. Stem cells will not divide as well on Earth, potentially, as they will on orbit. But just to make enough cells to expand protein production for molecules that have to be properly folded, properly glycosylated, fucosylated. Those are the barriers to actually purifying certain proteins here on Earth. And that's what we're hoping to do with Axiom Space. We're planning to do with Space Tango. The difference is we can bring the experiments back. So everything changed when Janice Studemeyer and Space Tango said, oh, we can bring your payload back. Before it was aspirational, now it's reality. We can bring these experiments back. Alison Moultrie already did this in July, a year and a half ago, together with Space Tango and UC San Diego, and now we just plan to do this iteratively. But we've got to get it right on the ground, and that's been the biggest challenge, actually, to get funding that's sufficient to be able to do these experiments here on Earth, so they'll work when we get into space, and we don't let Anjali and Jana down.
So is microgravity a good proxy for what we might expect, let's say, in zero-G environments, and is there any reason to differentiate the two?
Yeah.
Microgravity is, I think, a branding term from NASA, but essentially it's the same. And just to clarify, there is, 87% gravity in orbit, in low Earth orbit. It's just that because the space station is moving at 17,500 miles per hour forward, and there's a downward force, they're canceled, and so now you're floating, so to speak, on this aircraft. And or the spacecraft, and that's why the forces are eliminated. And then what happens to physical and biological sciences when that happens, and that's really what we're trying to leverage.
Thank you. I'm smarter now.
Sorry.
Any big aha moments so far? I mean, Jana, you were mentioning earlier that this stuff's already been going on, which was a surprise to me. I didn't realize that this research has already been going on. So in the early research, have there been any kind of interesting insights that you'd like to share?
Sure. I mean, so in early shuttle days, there was work that was done on, trying to find cures for things like MS. And there's actually a drug that is going through clinical trials right now that is looking at Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So there have been several opportunities for us to sort of understand the science a little bit better in these last few years too, as the capabilities have really advanced. And Keytruda is a great example of that, right? Not necessarily what we would have expected. Usually people have been going to space to look at things like, can I make my crystal for my protein bigger so that I can bring it back and look at those druggable targets, right? So to find this sort of aha moment of, wait a minute, we can make smaller, more uniform crystals as well. And that can be very therapeutically active. Those are the kinds of breakthrough moments, I think. And, in a lot of the work that goes on the physical science side, there's been many sort of moments where from a microfluidic perspective, we wouldn't have expected things to happen the way that they did on station. And, you know, sometimes there's great stories like, you know, Katie Coleman, who is an astronaut for NASA, was doing a physical science experiment, and she actually did it on orbit, and the researchers were watching her. And they, you know, were just astounded with what they saw in terms of this behavior of this fluid. And she was asked, and she thought she did it wrong. And so she called back down to the ground and said, like, you know, did I do something wrong? And it was no, that the team was just so astounded to see the phenomena change in microgravity and how they understood then what that meant in terms of all the fluid dynamics. And, you know, it happened to be related to liquid propellants and rocket fuels, right? But it changed the way that we thought about the opportunity to maybe even develop the next round of containers that will hold that fuel for those rockets that take us up there.
In terms of the aha moment for us, Greg, it was really about the immune dysfunction that seemed to be occurring in this unique environment on the International Space Station, and how that could be a potential trigger for precancer stem cell development. So we started to dig deeply into our whole genome sequencing data that we had analyzed from a stem cell standpoint. We purified stem cells from people with these precancerous conditions called myeloproliferative neoplasms, and then looked at the RNA signatures. And what we found there was quite an aha moment. It was actually a Bonnie and Clyde moment, where we discovered that two enzymes that are supposed to protect our genome and our RNA or transcriptome from viral integration or viral replication induced damage were both activated as people moved on from precancer to full-blown cancer, so pre-leukemia to full-blown leukemia. We would never have found the activation of these two antiviral enzymes if we hadn't looked at the twin study to say what inflammatory mediators would trigger this kind of effect. We published those results in Cell Reports just about a month ago. It's a little bit heretical, because what it says is you don't need radiation. You don't need chemicals like benzene. It could be massive inflammation in response to a viral infection like COVID that can trigger our own antiviral enzymes, which, by the way, behave in a human-specific way to try and edit our DNA and edit our RNA to make sure that viruses don't get into our DNA or RNA. So that was an aha moment for us. And the fact that we realized you can actually predict it and prevent it, that's going to help us on Earth. So we are able to help people before their cancer is a fully formed cancer. So that turned out to be very important for how we approach, you know, cancer in general. We want to start when it's pre-cancer and at the stem cell level specifically. So that gave me a new sense of optimism yesterday in clinic when I was seeing 18 people that have these precancerous disorders. We want to say to them, no, we can predict and prevent progression to full-blown cancer. That's an aha moment. That's a game changer. And that has a lot to do with what's being discovered by having people on orbit who will take their own blood and let us study that. So it's not just what product we develop, it's the essential insights into human biology in that unique environment that has jump-started a whole new field of precancer. That's a huge aha moment. You know, cancer is the #3 cause of death in this country. COVID is 3,000 deaths per day, followed by heart disease at about 2,000, and then cancer is about 1,600 deaths per day. Of course, we want to eradicate all three scourges, but this unique environment gives us insights into those three.
And I think the other thing that, oh, sorry.
I add one more comment to that. Sorry, go ahead, Janet.
Just the aha moment for NASA that I think has been most telling, because I think we think about what are the aha moments for us, right? But the big discovery for NASA was also, not only does the science that we're doing now on station really help them to understand the long duration missions and human exploration, but models and stem cells, human analogs, are really intriguing because of the fact that you eventually could make those out of astronaut cells, fly those before the astronaut actually flies, see changes at the cellular level, maybe fly them alongside of an astronaut and collect cellular data at the same time that you're collecting physiologic data. So that was a fascinating conversation as they started to see the work that's being done that is really leading edge science and how they could take that work and leverage it even for their own human exploration programs. Sorry,
Anjali, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, in terms of thinking about aha moments from a different perspective, as people are starting to build for spaceflight, one thing that's becoming evident is that you have to rethink how you build for space. You have to think about miniaturizing your technologies, ruggedizing it so it can withstand those, forces, those launch forces, automating the technology to make it simpler, lighter weight. So you have to rethink the materials that go into your product design. And then you have to think about the microfluidics. So then if you're putting all of this together, what are the benefits that you reap? A smaller footprint, perhaps lower cost, greater accessibility to markets that may not have access to those products, ease of use and mobility, and and then that leads to new uses. So for example, if you have something that you've miniaturized and now it's less expensive, you're opening it up to new markets, maybe new extreme environments or under-resourced markets that may not have access to that product previously. So this is a different way of thinking about those aha moments for building for spaceflight.
This is wonderful. So our Associate Vice Chancellor of Innovation at UCSD, Paul Robin, asks, this seems like a huge opportunity to bring expertise together from many different disciplines, both across the university, but also across the nation. Are we really doing enough at this point to bring all the appropriate people to the table to ensure that we cover all the opportunities for this to be truly transformational?
I just wanted to jump in here because Jana and Anjali are so innovative, as you can hear. I think that the biotech community and the high-tech community have really jumped into this space. They're not the ones lagging behind. They're really far out in front. I think we've been a little bit slow, actually, in academia to embrace this idea, not from aeronautical engineers, but from a biology standpoint. We can do so much more to partner with industry and also to work with funding agencies. What's the major impediment now? It's funding. It's getting enough funding to do these really involved experiments, to do the prototype development on the ground and then see how it's going to work once Jana gets her experiments up there, once Anjali has the CRO built, as an autonomous vehicle. It's actually astounding what we have the capacity to do. The main limitation is the almighty dollar and getting people to work together to share resources. Paul Robin is extremely innovative in terms of allowing these collaborations, actually accelerating these collaborations. But we really need to work with NIH. We need to work with NASA. We need to work with our new cell and regenerative medicine team, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, to say, how can we partner more effectively and more quickly to just have funding mechanisms that'll not only allow this, but promote this as a nascent opportunity. I think it's just going to be boring in 5 years. We'll say, well, of course, why are we even talking about this? Of course, we're doing things in space. It's a really vital opportunity. Right now, what we need is funding, and we need partner funding opportunities. The national labs and on the ISS are really keen to collaborate. I think we need to answer the question, why is it important? It's important because we have a lot of health issues on Earth we can't solve in this environment, at least as quickly. I think nucleating of crystals, you can get a better structure-based design approach for certain small molecules, working with Janet to lay down different biomaterials so things work better. When people want their vision back, they want it back and not distorted. They have to see properly. These are all things we could do, but funding is the main limitation.
Wonderful. For Anjali and Jana, we were wondering, how are we going to, as demand is going to increase for these types of services, how are you going to begin prioritizing what you look at, assuming everyone has funding, for this stuff?
Right. Yeah, well, it's getting really interesting because, as Pat mentioned, so we have commercial crew, right, that's going up now. Everybody saw the 2 missions that happened last year, and that's super exciting. Axiom is bringing us private astronaut missions that will start next year. So suddenly you have sort of this opportunity of just very much increased access to space. So where we used to have just commercial resupply missions that took our science up to the International Space Station, now the opportunity to be able to use multiple flights, kind of, have that infrastructure in place that allows access and the capabilities that are being developed, I think you're just going to see it's sort of an explosion of how, for the first time this year, we're actually having discussions that are fascinating about not going up and back on the same rocket, right? Mm-hmm. We can actually go up on one and come back on another because the chain is now becoming so robust in terms of our ability to access that environment that really just opens tremendous possibilities.
And I just want to add that if we have the funding and if we have this great idea, we hopefully won't have to prioritize because we are a commercial entity and we will have the launch vehicles, we have the accessibility, we have a great space station. So that would hopefully will not be a problem as the demand increases. The environment will sustain itself and provide those capabilities.
And I just wanted to say one more thing, and that's that Elon Musk and SpaceX have made all the difference. Because when you look at the capacity to launch new crews with 4 people from the US onto the International Space Station, that's a game changer. You have twice as many people as scientists working up there. It changes everything. And then being able to come back nimbly, I think that's really what has accelerated this whole idea and made it credible.
So as we move into space, does anything change with kind of regulatory regimes and the rules and who actually is helping understand that?
So that's space policy, space law, regulatory. And it's interesting because when you use the word regulatory in terms of space, obviously FAA regulates all of the spaceflight industry, right? So typically when we say the word regulation, everyone thinks FAA. And really what we're talking about is the FDA, right? So the regulation to do GMP manufacturing on orbit. For the longest time, so when I transitioned from biotech, pharma, medical device career into space about 6 years ago, everybody talked about how we're going to do all these things that were going to benefit life on Earth, right? And help people everywhere. And I used to just say, well, that's great, but you can't really do that unless you have an infrastructure in place that allows you to have those capabilities to actually manufacture on orbit. And that's the work that we're starting right now. We're laying that groundwork together with Axiom. We're looking at how do we establish those even facilities on the ground at Kennedy Space Center. So when you go to Space Station Processing Facility, it's not necessarily set up to be a GMP manufacturing environment, but that's what you need in order to load those payloads and then put them on a rocket and send them up 250 miles up into low Earth orbit, and then splash them back down again in the Atlantic Ocean and pick them up and put them into a distribution chain. So control throughout that process, control of the manufacturing process, as well as control of the logistics requires kind of unique discussions with FDA that we've already started. And, we're sort of having those initial conversations about Peter Marks, who everyone knows, right, is, always presenting at stem cell meetings. And he heard me about a year ago now, talk about the fact that we were getting ready to really start these discussions. And for a couple of years before that, we had talked about how we probably needed to have this conversation. And literally at this last meeting, I think, it was the moment that another aha moment that it's time. We need to have the discussion now because it's happening right now. So it's exciting to think about putting that kind of infrastructure in place. That opens this whole sector of the space economy. And, most people think of satellites, that's easy. You can look up, that's the vantage point of low Earth orbit. Microgravity gives you the opportunity and capabilities like GMP manufacturing to do biomedical as well as technology related products.
I think quality,
this is a really great
and safety are the key. Sorry, Anjali, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just thinking, as you mentioned, Peter Marks, I think of what the FDA is really supposed to do. They're supposed to keep us safe. They're supposed to make sure that if we take a product, we ingest it, we have it injected, it's going to be safe. And so the quality assurance piece is actually the main point of our iScore program. So we have functional reporters of stem cell activity. They're fluorescent reporters of stem cell activity that we're going to put into the stem cells before they go up on flight to see, are they maintaining their integrity, their functional integrity? Are they maintaining their capacity to transit the cell cycle properly? Are they maintaining the capacity that Becky mentioned in the very beginning of this to self-renew, or in other words, divide without differentiating in a very regulated way? Are they able to splice properly? Are they able to edit their transcriptome or genome properly? Those are essential stem cell functions. Can they activate signaling pathways that they need to clone themselves, or are they all just accelerated aging issues that we're going to have to deal with? But the product quality is what is going to take a little bit more scrutiny from the FDA, whether we're doing an IDE, a device, or an IND, an investigational new drug application, or both. The quality assurance piece is going to be probably a bigger part of what we do when we're bringing these products back from space.
Anjali?
Yeah, no, in general, I mean, these are just really exciting conversations. I think between Jana and Kat, we've covered this topic, but essentially these are conversations that we have in our office. You know, what is the regulatory, what are the policies that we need to build around?
So if I can eavesdrop on those conversations, one kind of final thing as we come to the close, this is what's missing. So as we do this, as you have these conversations, are there pieces that are still missing that you need to see advance that will complement or accelerate kind of what you do or support?
I'll start from sort of the NASA side, because, you know, NASA obviously has been built for space exploration and sort of taking us further, even beyond low Earth orbit, right? Moon and Mars are next. And you're going to start to see not just rovers land on other planets, but people on the moon, and, you know, landers coming up within probably the next 5 or 6 years. So as you think about sort of what's happening in the environment of how we move forward and where we're able to sort of take the NASA piece of this, I think that the sense that exploration is what's driving space is really something that we're helping to change, right? Because it's not just exploration, but it's the ability to build these commercial markets. So we need NASA to sort of think a little bit more like a commercial company. And you see that starting with these private partnerships, right? SpaceX first sort of said, we're going to re-land rockets and use them again. That's not a NASA mentality, right? NASA makes it once, uses it, and sort of that's it, because it's a safety issue for them. So it's a whole paradigm shift in terms of the way that NASA thinks about commercializing and sort of those benefits that not only create markets, but help them with longer duration exploration. So we're shaping that conversation with them now and helping them to understand what these benefits bring to life on Earth, as well as human exploration to go further.
And I would add that, yes, I would add that what's missing is investment. I think there's been a lot of focus on space investments with launch and satellites. And I was just reading a new book called Space is Open for Business by Robert Jacobson. And, you know, it really lays out a really great business case for space. But what's missing is investment for space biotech, for biological sciences, for moving these kinds of ideas that Kat has and others, moving them forward. It requires investment in private capital to really build those companies 250 miles above in the Orbital Lab that can have both benefits for exploration back to the moon and onward to Mars, but also back on Earth to improve the human condition. So it's really shifting the focus and the focus of those investments from, not just launch rockets, but also to biotech, space biotech.
And I of course agree completely with Jana and Anjali. I think the main component that's missing is training. How do we train the next generation of scientists, the next generation of physicians, the next generation of drug developers to do this in this unique environment? Do they all have to go through the NASA rigorous training program where you have to be a super athlete? Or do we have people who are really much more integrated in the very specific type of science that we need to do? We need to train really specialized crews to be on Anjali's spacecraft, to be able to work like they do on the ground for drug development, biologics, cellular therapeutics. So Jana's retinal device works. That kind of very well-trained expertise is what we need.
Wonderful. We're definitely getting to the end of our time together. We have enough content here, enough interest, and more questions. Our lists are very, very long. I apologize to all those in the audience who asked questions that we didn't have time to get to. Perhaps that's a great opportunity for maybe convening this conversation again or taking this kind of forward. At this point, I certainly want to thank each of the panelists, not only for your expertise, but for being pioneers and for kind of advancing this whole field, and then sharing that with us to get us pretty excited about the opportunities going forward. So at this point, I'd love to turn it back to Becky for any last minute thoughts on this. Becky?
Yeah, thank you, Greg, and thank you to all of the panelists. I think Paul Robin said it the best. This is truly inspirational information that we're receiving. And Greg, I had the same thought during the discussion that we need a part 2. So that'll be my job. But Jenna, Kat, Greg, Anjali, yeah, we understand your time is valuable in sharing this with our community of innovators, which are really also critical partners. And the next step is really helpful. And we're excited to follow progress and check in sometime later this year. So I want to remind the attendees that this has been recorded. And if you have colleagues that you think would like to hear this content, you'll receive a link to the recording in the post-event follow-up. Again, I want to thank UCSD Office of Innovation and Commercialization for collaborating to make this happen. And Anjali and I have worked for the past 3 months to put this together. So thank you very much for your time. LaunchBio, we do programs multiple times a month. So please visit launchbio.org. We have some amazing programs coming up about exiting, always an important topic. Let's see what we're talking about. You are what you eat. So I'll let you go to our website and explore that more, but always interesting. And we're happy to see the attendees visit and be with us today. So thank you for coming, and we will see you next time. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
So much.
Thanks.
Great day.
Appreciate it.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.